I found the letters hidden in her drawer, and my world collapsed. My wife was in love with another man. The letters detailed their secret meetings and wild nights. How could she do this to me? Desperate for answers, I hired a private investigator. He brought back photos of them in our bed. I felt sick, betrayed, and humiliated. When I confronted her, she just stared at me with cold eyes, unrepentant. That was the moment I knew I had to make her pay. She won't get away with this. I will expose her lies to everyone. It was mid-July when I finally heard from Natalie. "Well, that didn't take long," she said from her cool office in Florida. "What didn't take long?" I asked, confused. "Selling the book," she replied. I was speechless. She'd found a publisher in less than a month. "Are you still there?" She laughed. "Who bought it?" I asked. "The publishing rights or the movie rights?" she clarified. "The movie rights," I said. "Someone wanted to make a movie from my book." She laughed, then coughed, probably from smoking. "Calm down, kid. No one's bought it yet. We're in the middle of an auction war." "What's that?" I asked. "When a book is really good, all the publishers bid on it. It's like an auction with lots of phone calls, and that's a good thing." "And the movies?" I asked. "Same thing. Different producers bid for the movie rights." "How did they find out about the book?" I asked. "They have people at publishing houses who keep them informed." "So what are we talking about?" I asked, hesitating. "Money," she said. I fell silent, too afraid to say anything. "Well, kid," her voice turned serious, "you better tell me you're working on something else." "I'm almost finished with an outline," I said. "It's a thriller about Lieutenant Randolph." "Thank God," she sighed with relief. "He's a great character. Difficult, moody, but likable and smart. That will help sell him to a female audience." "Oh," I said, still not fully understanding. "Just like movies, publishers want proven stars. They like book series, like Jack Reacher or Hercule Poirot." "Oh, I get it," I said. "Good," she said. "If things go as planned, you'll be writing about Lieutenant Randolph for a long time. We're talking about a 3-book deal. And you'll be a millionaire," she added. My eyes widened in surprise. "So get moving on the outline, okay?" "Sure thing, boss," I said. "One more thing," she added. "I've arranged for your editor in Chicago to help you." "Who is he?" I asked. "She," Natalie corrected. "Her name is Marissa Key. You'll like her." As I hung up, I heard her laugh. The next morning, my phone rang as I was having coffee. "Who is it?" my dad asked, reading the paper and eating toast. "I don't know," I said, seeing an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" "Tyler Collins?" a voice said. It was somewhere between deep and high, almost questioning. "Speak up," I said. "This is Marissa Key, your editor," she said. "Miss Key," I said, "I've been expecting you. How's your day going?" "Skip the small talk," she said. "What does your day look like?" I asked my dad. "We're free after the morning," he said. "I'm free from 11, I told her. "Great," she said. "I'll be there at 11:30. "You're coming here?" I asked, relieved I wouldn't have to drive to Chicago. "Yes," she confirmed. "Are there any hotels where you live?" "Grant City," I said. "And yes, we have 2 hotels." "Great. I'll be at your house at 11:30, she said, sounding a bit flustered. "Do you know where I live?" "Yes," she said, then hung up. I wondered what Natalie had gotten me into. By 11:15, Dad had left for Mom's, and I had cleaned off the fine hazelnut dust from my skin and hair. I changed into clean khaki pants, a light blue shirt with the cuffs rolled up for the summer heat, and sneakers without socks. I was brushing my wet, messy hair when the doorbell rang. Marissa Key had arrived early. I ran the comb through my hair one last time, checked that I had shaved well, and hurried to the stairs. Why am I rushing like a late schoolboy? I thought, slowing down as I reached the door because her voice on the phone, her blunt manners, made me feel like I was meeting a strict teacher. When I opened the door, I realized Marissa Key didn't look like a teacher. Maybe a rock band fan, but not a teacher. "Mr. Collins," she said with an unplaceable accent. I nodded and stepped back, looking her over. She was almost as tall as me, around 5'9", with long legs and sharp facial features. She was thin, like a runway model who lived on water and crackers. Her hair was short, thick, and spiky, like she had stuck her finger in a socket. Her face was part female, part Native American with a bit of Asian. She had a small chin, high cheekbones, small but full lips, a small nose, and large, deep-set brown eyes that slanted slightly, giving them an Asian look. Overall, Marissa Key could have been a runway model. She had the looks and the awkward, gangly walk of a newborn foal. But her clothes didn't match that image. She was dressed like she was going to a punk rock concert. Tight black jeans, black leather boots with metal studs, a tight t-shirt, studded leather bracelets, and a large black leather bag. Her makeup added to the look. Black mascara, lipstick, nail polish, and a diamond stud in her left nostril. It was hard to guess her age. She could pass for 18, but she could have been my age. "Where are we going to work?" she asked, ignoring my surprised look. Do you have a dining table?" she asked. I nodded, focusing on her dark brown eyes. "Can you run a cord to your laptop?" "Yes, sure," I said. "Great," she said, heading toward the kitchen and looking around. "Take your laptop to the table." I followed her instructions. A few minutes later, the laptop was set up and we sat down at the table. She placed the laptop in front of her and asked me to move closer so we could both see the screen. "Okay," she said. "Once I have the final version of Long Gone downloaded, it's time to get to work." She reached into her black bag and pulled out a worn copy of the Long Gone manuscript. It was thick, at least 6 inches, bound with rubber bands and covered with yellow notes. "Have you read it yet?" I asked as she removed the rubber bands. "Of course," she replied. "And what do you think?" I asked, hoping for a compliment. She turned and looked at me. Her look said, "You're wasting my time." "You're a capable writer, Mr. Collins," she said. "Tyler," I corrected her. "Just capable?" She made a face. "It's better than most." "Really?" "Really," she said, unfolding the first 10 pages in front of us. "Now, can we get started?" "Sure." "Good," she said, making it clear we wouldn't waste any more time. And we didn't. She had had the manuscript for a week and it was covered with her notes. Notes about little things. "Isn't there a better word for this? What are you trying to say? Is that the best way to say it? Reinforce this passage. You're letting the conflict subside. The tension dies." And that was just the first 60 pages, which took us until 6:30 p.m., 7 hours. We took 2 bathroom breaks, and she took 3 smoke breaks, standing on the back porch, looking into the distance, puffing on a cigarette. I tried to chat with her during the first break, but her look told me it wasn't a good idea. I had to admit, though, she was good. Just really good. I was amazed when I reread the first 15 pages of my final manuscript, the one that might make me a millionaire. The changes were small. 1 word here, 1 sentence there. The dialogue became more vague in one place and clearer in another, but the overall effect was magical. It was a huge improvement. "Well," she said, pushing away from the table as I read our changes. "Okay, her changes. Enough for one day." "Are you hungry?" I asked. "Are there any decent restaurants in this town?" she replied. I smiled. "Well," she said. "Can I take you out to dinner?" I asked. She shook her head. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Collins." "Probably not," I said, "but I want to." Her look told me to back off, which made me try harder. "Look," I said, "I really want to talk about this, about you, about how you do it. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to take you out to dinner." She looked at me with her lips pressed together and said nothing. I decided to wait, trying to make an innocent face. After a moment, a smile flickered at the corners of her lips, the closest thing to a smile I'd seen all day. "Great," she said, gathering the loose manuscript pages into a neat stack. "Then we'll make this a working dinner. We should have time to do another 10 pages. I tried to show with my body language that this wasn't what I meant, but she ignored me. "Bring the laptop," she said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. I obeyed. All thoughts of Marissa Key being anorexic were quickly dispelled at dinner. I watched her steadily devour a bowl, not a cup, of gazpacho, followed by the main course, Mexican stuffed meatloaf with grilled zucchini and chipotle cheese mashed potatoes. When she finished, the plate looked like it had just been pulled out of the dishwasher. "Still hungry?" I asked, looking at my half-eaten braised brisket sandwich with a side of fresh fruit. "Sure," she replied, pushing her plate away and placing mine in front of her. And all the while she ate, we continued to edit the manuscript. It went faster now as I learned to trust her advice, and she learned to trust my taste in sentence construction and word choice. The waitress came over as Marissa was finishing the last of the fruit. It was Nicole. She and her husband owned the place. She glanced at the plates, then at Marissa. "Dessert?" Nicole asked. "What do you have?" Marissa asked, not lifting her eyes from the laptop. There was disbelief in Nicole's gaze. I only shrugged slightly and smiled back. Nicole offered a choice of dessert, and Marissa chose bananas Foster with cinnamon ice cream. "2 scoops," said Nicole. Marissa looked at her, then at me. "Would you like one, Mr. Collins?" I only smiled and shook my head. "Just coffee, please." Nicole nearly burst out laughing, but Marissa didn't notice. "Would you stop calling me Mr. Collins?" I said. "That's your name," she replied, pointing to the manuscript. "How about this one?" I said. "I prefer Tyler. We're probably about the same age, right?" "Whatever," she said, showing impatience again. "Okay, Tyler, I'll call you Tyler." "Okay. So, Tyler, what do we do here?" "Tyler," I said, smiling at her annoyance. "Great. Let's change it up." "How? What do you have in mind?" "For you to tell me how to tighten it," she said, her speech slowing down. "No," I said. "I wanted to have dinner to get ideas on how to better edit my work. Instead, we spent the evening editing. And you never said anything to me. So I want to know how you would have done it. And I want you to tell me why. Hell, I want you to tell me how you even saw this flaw." She frowned, then looked at the laptop and saved her work to both the internal hard drive and a flash drive. Closing the laptop, she pushed it aside and reassembled the manuscript, which she placed on top of the laptop, just in time for Nicole to place dessert in front of her. Taking a spoonful and a bite, she turned to me. "Okay, shoot. What do you want to know?" "How old are you?" 25. "How did you get into this field?" "Editing. I'm in graduate school at Northwestern University, working on my doctorate. This pays the bills. Specialty, English and creative writing." "Have you written anything?" Anger flashed across her face, but she said nothing. "And how long have you been editing professionally?" 4 years. "Why do you do it?" "Like I said, it pays the bills. Teaching, you know, isn't cheap." I nodded. "How long did it take you to go through and practically tear apart every page of my manuscript?" Her eyes narrowed. "No need to take offense," she said. "It's my work." "I'm not offended," I protested. "I'm curious. I spent 2 months editing and you just got it last week, so how long did it take?" 3 days, she replied, shoving another bananas Foster into her mouth. "It's really good, by the way. Are you sure you don't want some?" "No, I'm fine," I said, but she was already holding a spoonful of ice cream and caramelized bananas in front of my mouth. "Really?" she said. "Try some." I rolled my eyes and tasted it. "You're right," I said, taking the spoon from her and eating a banana slice covered in caramel and melted ice cream. She smiled, the first real smile of the day. "Look," she said as we shared the rest of our dessert, "I did well on Sunday morning. I worked 17 to 18 hours a day for 3 days. And what was the first thing you did? Read the whole book twice. You read fast." She shook her head. "Fast, but not exactly speed reading. You get faster the second time because you know what to expect," she explained. "I start making notes where the plot is weaker, or if a word or phrase is unclear." I nodded, thinking I understood. But seeing her find errors on nearly every page of my manuscript made me realize I didn't know much. "So, what's next?" She scooped up the last bite of dessert and offered it to me. I waved it away and she seemed pleased. "After that, I just keep repeating the process." "How many times have you done that?" I asked. She shrugged. 12, maybe 14 times, a lot." "Do you get paid well for that?" She hesitated. "Good enough." "Does it cover your expenses while you're here?" She shook her head. "They expect me to drive to Chicago and back every day, but that's not practical." I pulled out my cell phone. "Who are you calling?" she asked, her eyes widening. "They should pay for your room and food," I said. She shook her head and tried to take the phone from me, but I turned away. "Natalie?" I said when she answered. "Hey, Tyler," she whispered. I'd never met her, but I imagined an older woman with a smoky voice. "Marissa's here," I said. "Good," she giggled. "She needs the publisher to pay for her room and board while she's here." "But she's only an hour away," Natalie protested. "That's 2 hours a day spent traveling when she could be working," I said. Natalie was silent for a moment. "Are you willing to put things on hold until this is done?" she asked. "Yes," I said, looking at Marissa, who was staring at me. "Great. How much can a room in Podunk, Illinois cost?" Natalie sighed. "And Natalie, this was my idea," I said, looking directly at Marissa. "She's upset that I'm even asking for it." "Okay," Natalie laughed. "I told you she was tough." "No," I said, "you didn't tell me anything specific." Natalie seemed to find that funny and kept laughing as I hung up. "You need to pay for school," I said, tucking my phone into my pocket. $1,000 for room and board is better covered by those who can afford it. Marissa didn't look pleased. She stomped to the restroom and then gathered her things. 8 o'clock, she said, looking at me. "I'll see you then." By the end of the next day, we had gone through another 70 pages of the manuscript, revisiting the first 60 pages and making more changes. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. "That's enough," Marissa said, watching me rub my tired eyes. I nodded. "Tomorrow, then," she said, packing up her things. "Wait," I said, holding up my hand. She yanked it away and glared at me. "What? Why are you so angry?" I asked. "All day you've been upset. You didn't have to book a hotel room and food," she said. "I didn't do it just for you," I said. "I did it so we could finish faster." "Yeah, whatever," she said, still tense. "I just don't understand why." "Because," she muttered, "they don't want hired editors to make too many demands. If we do, they'll just hire someone else. Do you understand, Mr. Collins? You got what you wanted, but I might get less work because of it. Are you satisfied now?" I could only stare, feeling bad that I tried to help but might have hurt her career. Then I reached for my phone and called Natalie again. "She's amazing," I said. "We're really making progress." "That's great, babe," Natalie said. "That call yesterday," I said. "Is she going to get in trouble for that?" "Publishers can get tricky," she said. "It depends on who gets the book. Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't think you cared," she said, surprised by my anger. "Then don't do it," I said. "I'll take care of it myself." "Okay, Tyler," Natalie said. "I'll handle it, okay?" "Really, we're not taking any chances," I said, looking at Marissa. Her features were still annoyed. "You really like her, don't you?" Natalie said, shocked. "She's amazing," I said, "and I want to make sure she works with me on the next one." "Good," Natalie said. "Consider it done. We'll split the cost if that's okay with you." "No," I said. "I'll take care of everything myself." "If that's what you want," she said softly. "And all this mess," I added, "it's going to stay between us, okay? And you won't hold any grudges against her in the future, right?" "I wouldn't do that," she protested, perhaps a bit too strongly. "I'm serious," I insisted. "If she doesn't get a job because of me, I'll know. And if she doesn't work on my next book, I'll know why." "Okay, calm down, Tyler," Natalie said. "I said it's forgotten, so it's forgotten." "Thank you, and I'm sorry for getting involved." "Don't worry about it, babe," she said before hanging up. I turned to Marissa. "Okay?" I asked. She nodded slightly, and I apologized again. "I won't try again." She nodded again, lips tight. "Since I'm paying, can I buy you dinner before you go back to your room for the night?" "Just a burger," she said. "Not as expensive as last night." "I can afford more than just a burger," I insisted. "Just a burger," she repeated, eyes flashing. "The hitching rail it is," I said, getting up from the table. We drove to the restaurant in separate cars, and I got there first. As soon as I walked in, I was greeted with a hug and a kiss from Allie. "Hi," she said, smiling. "Hi, baby," I said, holding her close. It felt good to hug her, especially after spending 10 hours with Marissa, who treated me poorly. "Have you eaten yet?" she whispered. I shook my head. "Actually, I'm meeting someone here for a work dinner." "Oh," she said, almost pouting. "You could join us," I suggested. "Is he here yet?" she asked. I saw Marissa getting out of her car. "She is," I said, nodding toward the window. "You're kidding, right?" Allie said, trying to hide her shock as she saw Marissa walk in. "Be nice," I whispered, then turned to Marissa. "Marissa, this is Allison, my girlfriend." Marissa nodded, extended her hand. "Allison." Allie tried to smile, but her eyes stopped at Marissa's black makeup and spiked hair. "Is it okay if she joins us for dinner?" I asked Marissa. "Invite whoever you want," Marissa shrugged. We sat down and ordered. "So, do you want to work on this or what?" Marissa asked. "Work on what?" Allie asked, confused. "His book," Marissa replied, glancing at me. "A book?" Allie said, surprised. "You wrote a book?" "Yes," I explained, "and Marissa is my editor." "Really?" Allie said, still amazed. "Can I see it?" Marissa pulled out a worn manuscript and handed it to Allie. "Holy cow," Allie said, flipping through the pages. "It's huge." "I was going to tell you as soon as we found a publisher," I said, looking at Marissa. "How did you find a publisher?" Allie asked, eyes on the manuscript. The next hour was filled with talk about when and why I started writing, what the book was about, and the publishing process. Marissa mostly ate her burger and fries, occasionally adding to the conversation about publishing. Allie finally put Marissa on the spot. "How many books have you edited so far?" she asked. 19, Marissa replied. "Any I've heard of?" Marissa named a few that had hit the bestseller lists. "And this one? How does it compare?" Allie asked. Marissa shrugged. "They were all pretty good." "So, what do you think of this one?" Allie pressed. Marissa just chewed her lip, avoiding eye contact. "You're not hurting his feelings," Allie assured her. "Right, Tyler?" "Not at all," I agreed. "So how is it?" Marissa didn't respond. Allie gave me a puzzled look. "What's going on here?" Allie asked, turning back to Marissa and leaning over the table. "Is it that bad?" I asked. Marissa looked up sharply like she'd been slapped. "You're kidding, right? That bad? So it's good?" Allie clarified. "It's the best thing I've ever worked on," Marissa said, giving me a confused look. "So you think it's—" I started. "I can't say if it will sell," she said, looking around the table. "But if people know good from bad, it'll be huge." My mouth dropped open. "That good?" "Better," Marissa said. "You mean it's better than just capable?" I asked, recalling her earlier comment. She looked at me, then back at the table. "Yes, better." "Jesus, Tyler," Allie said, watching Marissa's reaction. "I'm sorry," I said. "Why don't we all go get a beer?" "Sure," Allie said, standing up. Marissa shifted her gaze from me to Allie, then back again. "I'll just go back and go to bed if that's okay." Allie tried to convince her to stay, but Marissa left, and Allie and I headed to the bar. Halfway through the first beer, Allie started to smirk. "What?" I asked. "It's the beer," she said, making a face. "What's wrong with it?" "It doesn't taste right." "Let me get you another one," I said, turning to the bartender. "That's not the point," she said, leaning closer. "I'm just thinking of something that might taste better." I understood. We hurried to her house, and I soon found out she was right. It tasted a lot better than beer. "She's weird," Allie said as we cuddled. "How so?" I asked. "Like you haven't noticed." "You mean the makeup and black clothes?" "For starters," she said, turning to face me. "But she seems angry at everyone." I thought about it. "Maybe she's just having a bad day. You only met her for an hour at dinner." Allie looked into my eyes, considering my words. Then she smiled. "That's why I love you," she said. "You're so sweet. You can't say bad things about anyone." "Love me?" I tensed at the word. "You know what I mean," she said, showing me exactly what she meant. I spent the next 5 days with Marissa, working 10 to 12 hours a day. We edited, tweaking words and making changes. On the 4th morning, I noticed she had additional notes and changes from the previous days. "When do you do this?" I asked. "What?" she snapped, annoyed by my questions. "After dinner, what difference does it make? It has to be done." I realized she was working another 4 or 5 hours while I was at the store. "I just didn't notice before," I said. "Okay, good. Now you know. Can we get back to work?" That's when I realized she wasn't angry at the world. Marissa was focused, and when distracted, she got impatient. I smiled at this thought and decided to test it. "So, are you seeing anyone?" "None of your business," she replied without looking up. "Have you ever been married?" "No," she said, turning back to the manuscript. Are you sure about that passage? Yes, I said. What about kids? Do you have any? That was it. What the hell? She said. Who cares? My personal life is none of your business. Worry about this book. The sooner you stop worrying about my personal life and start worrying about turning this piece of crap into a readable story, the better off we'll both be. You said it's already pretty good, I replied, enjoying the argument. Yes, but it needs work, and we don't have a lot of time, she said, standing up. I'm going outside for a smoke. I smiled as she lit up, puffing furiously to get rid of the tension I'd created. Just as she finished, my dad pulled into the driveway. I watched him get out of the car and spot the stranger smoking on the back porch. The look on his face was priceless. I had told him about the editor but hadn't described her. He'd been busy with rehab work for the past 2 weeks, so he'd never seen her. When he walked into the kitchen, I giggled at his stunned expression as he passed her with a polite nod. Is that? He whispered. Yes, I said excitedly. What do you think of her? He glanced at her, then back at me. You're kidding, right? Is she going to help you with the book? She is. Is she good? His doubtful look made me feel confident. Actually, Dad, she's a genius. She's from Chicago, isn't she? It was obvious. Goth girls were rare in Grant City, even at our local college. I nodded. Jesus, he said, shaking his head as he went upstairs to change. I heard him muttering as he climbed the stairs. Marissa came back from her smoke break, and we got back to work without more questions. When Dad went to the store, he used the front door, avoiding us. On day 11, Marissa and I were 23 pages away from finishing when my cell phone rang. Natalie, I answered. We finally got the winning bid, she said, her excitement almost jumping through the phone. I froze. Well, she prompted, don't you want to ask who? How many books? I asked slowly. 3. With an option for 2 more. So, 5 books about Lieutenant Randolph? No, just 3 for now. If those do well, 2 more. Your fee is 15%, which is above average for a newcomer. The first print run of Long Gone will be 250,000 copies. Your advance is 1/3 of the royalties from the first print run, with the rest paid quarterly. And how much is that? $17 a book, a little over $200,000 when you sign the contract. The rest comes as sales exceed the first third of the print run. Clear? Yes, 200,000. Good. Here's the best part. Your rate goes up to 18 for all copies over $500,000. And the movie rights, we sold the option for $500,000 with a percentage of the gross proceeds if the movie gets made. So I get $500,000 even if they don't make the movie? Bingo. When? As soon as you sign the contract. Get to Miami, honey. I sat up, looking at Marissa but not seeing her. We'll be ready by noon tomorrow, I said. Natalie sighed with relief. Great timing, kiddo. Can you come here the next day? Sure. See you then. I closed my phone and stared at the ceiling. Good news? Marissa asked. It's sold, I nodded. She smiled strangely. Good. Let's get moving. You promised to have it done by noon tomorrow. Feeling dizzy from everything happening, I leaned over and hugged Marissa tightly, almost knocking her off her chair. As we hugged, I felt the tension leave my body, but her body grew tense. I'm sorry, I murmured, breaking the hug and looking at her, embarrassed. Never mind, she said, pulling away and looking at the manuscript. Where were we? We finished at 3 in the afternoon. Marissa emailed the finished manuscript to Natalie and began tidying up. Let's celebrate, I said. She looked at me and shook her head. Come on, I insisted. Just one last dinner at the bar and grill. They have a new dessert. She hesitated, but I pushed on. Look, I know you're sick of me by now. You probably just want to get out of here and have a real meal in some secluded corner of town. But we need to start a tradition, I said. A tradition? She echoed. Yes, a tradition, I repeated. You'll be the editor for all my books if you want to, and we'll always end the editing process with dinner at the bar and grill. Then you'll forget about me for 6 months until you have to come back. I'll spend that time writing another book and we'll start all over again, ending at the bar and grill. A tradition, she repeated, a smile appearing for only the second time since we met. Like a Thanksgiving turkey. Exactly like Santa Claus, I said. You can't stray from tradition, she agreed, even if it's just the beginning of one. Got to start somewhere, I said. She smiled fully now, showing all her teeth. It was a beautiful smile, minus the black lipstick. Should I call your girlfriend? She asked. I shook my head. No. She tilted her head. Why not? Because we're starting a tradition, I reasoned. I don't know if we'll be together next year, but if we are, we'll still have to invite her because of the tradition. Marissa nodded in mock understanding. Exactly. Okay, she said, standing up and gathering her things. Pick me up at 5:30. Deal. At 5:45, we were sitting at the bar and grill. Marissa was devouring Thai-glazed chicken wings, and I was sipping a beer watching her. What? She asked, seeing me stare as she sucked sauce from her fingers. I just don't understand how you eat so much and stay so thin, I said. Skinny, she said, pushing her empty plate aside. You can say it, I'm skinny. Beanpole, I know what I look like. I smiled. How do you do that? I don't know, she replied. Just luck, I guess. So what do you do? I know you're in grad school, but for what? Writing, she said. I love books. They are my passion, my whole reason for being. So you want to teach? Sure, I guess so, she smiled as the waitress brought our dinners. A Roadhouse burger with fries for her and a grilled chicken sandwich with fresh fruit for me. I'm sorry, but I can't eat like you. I'll weigh 400 pounds, I said. I really want to write, she said with her mouth full. Books, short stories, poems. Short stories are good, but you won't make enough to live on. So I guess I'll start with books. Any ideas? She shook her head, shoving down a pile of fries and washing it down with a swig of Bacardi and Coke. Need more experience, she said. What about your life experience? I asked, pushing her to talk more. She looked puzzled. Are you married? Engaged? Children? Any brothers or sisters? Where do you come from? Tell me about Marissa Key. Not much to tell. Born and raised in Chicago, half-sister. Mom and dad divorced when I was 7. I've seen him about 10 times since then. Mom's a teacher, sister's a lawyer, never been married or engaged, and I'm not dating anyone right now. I nodded. So your half-sister is a lawyer? I said, noticing a faint resemblance. Yes. Your girlfriend is from Florida? Susan is my sister. Different fathers, same mother. I was stunned. Natalie laughed. Don't pout, Marissa said, seeing the emotion on my face. So when did Susan say she knew the agent? I asked. She lied, Marissa admitted. I know the agent, but when she read your manuscript, she called me and said I should read it and find someone to look at it for you. She sent it to me and I read it. She was right. It was incredible. And you called Natalie, I concluded. Marissa nodded. I'd worked for her before, told her I'd found a great manuscript that needed an agent to promote a new author. I had to beg, but she agreed to read it if Susan could get it to her. And the rest is history, I said. Pretty much, yes, Marissa agreed. We finished our dinner in silence. I didn't know how to feel and wondered why I even cared. Tired of sulking? She asked, reaching for a piece of melon on my plate. I laughed. Nothing to sulk about, right? She shrugged. I mean, you did me a big favor. I just wish I'd known about it sooner, I guess. What difference does it make to me? I wouldn't have backed out so quickly by making Natalie pay for the room. It's still a business. Always remember that, Marissa said. And your share, do you get anything? She shrugged. Natalie will probably give me a bonus. Not much, but something. What's in it for you, then? You're kidding, right? I know it's not fun working with me. You've made that clear over the last 11 days, but it's a chance to help another promising author. I shook my head. Fine, she said. Natalie agreed to be my agent if I write a book. It doesn't cost me anything. Okay, I nodded. Fair enough. The waitress cleared our plates, and Marissa ordered a warm peach melba and a glass of Pinot Grigio. How's Susan doing? I asked. She likes you, Marissa replied, finishing her Bacardi and Coke and glancing at the kitchen door. Very much so. Is she seeing anyone? Do you really care? Marissa asked. What does that mean? You just sounded like you two were just friends, that's all. It wasn't my intention, I said, feeling my anger rise. Chill out, dude, she said, grimacing. There's nothing wrong with that. Even if you were, I'm just saying. Saying what? That she was just a convenient fling, that's all I cared about. Hey, she said, calm down. I don't know how you felt or still feel about her, okay? I nodded, trying to calm down. "Who's that in there?" Marissa asked, changing the subject. "Don't change the subject," I replied. "It's just that she's been looking at you for the last 20 minutes and I can't tell if it's good or bad." I started to turn around, but Marissa's hand on my arm stopped me. "Don't look," she said. "She looks a lot like your girlfriend, Allison, right?" "Yeah, her, and she's with a boyfriend and a baby." "My ex-wife," I said, "with her new family." Marissa frowned, then picked up her spoon and took a bite of peach melba as it was placed in front of her. "Want a bite?" she asked with a mouthful of dessert. I shook my head, sipping my coffee. "So this is her new husband and their baby," I said, glancing to make sure it was really Christine. She looked at me, as did Randy, who seemed mortified by everything. Christine turned away, and Randy continued to stare. Marissa said something I didn't catch. "What?" I asked. I said it wasn't his baby. "What do you mean? Of course it's his. That's why she left, to be with him, get pregnant, and start a new family." "When was the baby born? Does it matter? Because there's no way it could be his," she said, looking into my eyes with a mix of fear and sadness. "It's his," I repeated. "Look at him, Tyler. He's about 5 or 6, tall and strong. The baby is big, even for a 1-year-old, and he has the blandest hair and bluest eyes I've ever seen. From 15 feet away, I can see the blue." "So what are you saying?" I asked, knowing exactly what she meant. "You have light brown hair. You were probably blonde as a kid, and you have blue eyes and light skin, not dark like his." "He's not my baby," I whispered, my voice hoarse as I counted the months in my head. "When was he born?" she asked. "I don't know." "You might want to find out," she said, pushing aside the unfinished dessert and finishing her wine. We left without saying a word to each other, and I felt Christine's eyes burning holes in my back as we walked past them. Part 2. "It's a simple question," I said to Allison. Her eyes didn't meet mine, which gave me an answer. "How long have you two known each other?" She wrinkled her nose. "How long?" I repeated, my voice getting louder. "It became obvious about 6 months ago," she muttered. "When was he born?" I demanded. Allie looked at me with annoyance. "The date of his birth," I insisted. "When was that?" "August 17th of last year," she said. I counted in my mind. It was entirely possible. Christine had been visiting her in-laws for most of December, the last month of our marriage, and had probably been with Randy the whole time. Still, it was entirely possible that the boy was mine. "Why didn't you tell me anything about this?" Tears appeared in Allie's eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have said something. I know I should have, but I don't know." "She's really afraid you'll do something, that's all, and she's my cousin." "So what does that make me, just someone you can keep in the dark?" "No!" she screamed. "I love you, Tyler. I've always loved you, but she's my cousin. We're close. You know that." She was right. They were close, but it didn't matter to me. If her loyalties were divided, she had to tell me. "Please say you forgive me," Allie begged, tears streaming down her face as she reached for me. I held her back. "What did Christine tell you?" I demanded. "She doesn't know," Allie said. "She's afraid." "Afraid? Of what?" "Afraid your father will find out and do something. Afraid Randy will find out and leave her." "Why should he care? He knew what he was risking when he married her while she was pregnant with a child that could have been mine." "Because she can't have any more children," Allie said, snorting as the tears subsided. "There were complications when Ben was born. She had to have her tubes tied, and Randy wanted kids. If he finds out this one isn't his, it won't be good." I nodded. Christine could be in a complete mess. She could lose her new love because of the mess she'd gotten us all into. I stood up and walked to the door. "Please don't go, Tyler. Please." I stopped at the door, my hand on the doorknob. "Please," she continued to beg, her sobs getting louder. I opened the door and left without looking back. Early the next morning, I flew to Florida. Susan met me at the gate and gave me a big hug. "I thought you'd be happy to see me," she whispered in my ear. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing myself to smile. "Something came up." She nodded. "Marissa told me." My eyes narrowed. "What exactly?" "Just that you might have a son you didn't know about." I nodded. "Come on, we can talk in the car." She smiled and took my hand, leading me to the parking lot. "So what should I do?" I asked as we drove. About what? About my son. What do you want to do? I thought about it for a moment. It was a simple question, but hard to answer. I guess I want to find out if he's even mine. Good idea. And how am I supposed to do that? Well, she said, biting her lip, you could file a paternity suit in Illinois or reopen the divorce case there. Not really my thing, I sighed. Susan continued, I'll call a few people we know in Chicago and see who they recommend for cases like this. Thanks, I said, looking out at the scenery. We drove the rest of the way to Natalie's office in silence. So this is the great Tyler Collins, a petite 60-year-old woman with flawless makeup, lots of jewelry, and a deep, raspy voice said as I walked into the lobby with Susan. And you're Natalie? I asked, extending my hand. Oh no, sweetie, she said, pulling me into a hug. I don't get to cuddle with good-looking men very often these days. I'm not going to let this go to waste. She hugged me, and I could smell the smoke from a million cigarettes on her clothes. You're just as handsome as Susan said, Natalie said, breaking the hug. Maybe even better. I smiled. It wasn't often that a 60-year-old woman hit on me in front of a former lover and a young secretary with a Playboy figure. The secretary ignored Natalie, apparently used to this behavior. Susan just laughed. Well, Natalie said, looking me over. Contracts? Yes, I replied. Good, she said, practically rubbing her hands together with joy. The three of us walked to the conference room. Natalie invited Susan and me to sit, and she sat across from us. Here you go, she said, opening a folder and pulling out thick documents with "Sign Here" labels. She handed them to me. Have you seen these? I asked Susan. She nodded. They're fine. Good, I said, and spent the next 10 minutes flipping through the documents while Susan explained them. Were you even listening to me? Susan asked when I finished. Not really. She frowned, and I turned to Natalie. Are these the terms you told me on the phone? Of course, Natalie said, and they're good terms for an aspiring author. Excellent conditions. Then what's there to worry about? I asked Natalie. You both have my back, and I'm free to figure out how to give them another book within 6 months, Susan said. My eyes widened. Is it out there somewhere? She threw up her hands in despair at my casual attitude. How far along are you? Asked Natalie. Almost finished with the outline, I replied. She nodded. Shouldn't be a problem then, right? I smiled. No, I'll get it done. We spent the next hour discussing technical details I didn't care much about. We talked about the book tour, talk show appearances, which authors would give quotes for the dust jacket, cover illustrations, and other details. Most of the time, I nodded and agreed with Natalie's suggestions. Before I knew it, the meeting was over, and Susan and I were back in her car, headed somewhere for lunch. Okay, she finally said as the waitress took our drink orders and left us alone. Good, I said, not taking my eyes off the endless ocean outside the window. You can play this 3 ways, Susan said. Play what? This situation, she clarified. You can do nothing and always wonder if he's your son. I glared at her, not wanting to discuss what had been on my mind since Marissa suggested the possibility and Allie pretty much confirmed it. Or, Susan continued, ignoring my gaze, you could have a paternity test done. If he's yours, get visitation rights and pay child support. The support will be significant considering the papers you just signed. I started to protest that money didn't matter, but she continued. Or you could do a paternity test, and if he's yours, do nothing. Maybe she'll just agree. That option is definitely out, I said. I can't know I have a son and just leave him with her and that guy. So what's it going to be? She asked. It's not that simple, I said, my voice louder than expected. Yes, it is, Susan said. You either leave it as it is and always wonder, or you find out and deal with it. Which do you choose? I hesitated, looking at the ocean and realizing she was right. Well, she said as the waitress brought our drinks. B, I said. I should know. She nodded, smiling. Good boy. Then she opened her cell phone and called the office. Yes, it's me, she said when the other end answered. Call our Chicago office and give me some family law referrals. She looked at me. What county are you in? Lincoln County, Illinois, I replied. She repeated it into the phone. Try to hurry and call me with names and phone numbers as soon as you have them. Okay, thanks. She hung up. Now, she said, spreading the napkin on her lap, can we relax and enjoy our lunch? We did, and I felt better knowing something was being done. By the time I was boarding the plane 3 hours later, I had the names of 3 attorneys in my pocket and an appointment for the next day with the only Grant City attorney on the list. Take care, Mr. Best-selling author, Susan said, leaning over and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. You too, hotshot Florida legal eagle, I replied, hugging her tightly. Our relationship would now forever be a client-attorney one. So, James McNeely, I said, raising my eyes from my Florida divorce decree. You think this boy she has with Walters now could be yours? I nodded. Based on what? He was definitely conceived while we were still married, I said. Were you living apart? I shook my head. It was about 2 or 3 weeks later. He nodded. And you had a relationship with her during that time? Once, I said. And with Walters? I don't know, I'd bet on it. She was here for a few weeks around that time, and they were married by the time the boy was born. When you saw her at the divorce hearing, was she wearing makeup? I thought she'd just put on some weight. He nodded, considering all the legalities. Is there anything else? He looks like me, I said. Light skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. And Randy? Nothing like that, I said. Neither is Christine, except for the blue eyes. She has dyed hair and she's darker. Good, he said, leaning forward. Have you thought this through? Completely. You realize you could pay a lot of child support, especially now that there's a book involved. I don't care, I said, angry that everyone seemed to think it was all about the money. Calm down, he said. My job is to explain all aspects of the situation to you. You need to make an informed decision, he said. Okay? Okay, just do it. He smiled, showing perfect teeth and a dimple in his chin. He had the movie star looks of a lawyer in his early 40s. Are you a shark? I asked, skeptical. When I need to be, he replied. Meaning? Meaning you don't always need a shark. Sometimes you need a negotiator. Not with her, I said. With Christine, I need a shark. We'll see how things play out and deal with it as we go. Okay, he said confidently. Let's find out if he's your son before we do anything else. That made sense. I relaxed. Deal. Good, he said. We spent the next 20 minutes discussing the terms of representation, costs, and the information he needed to file a lawsuit. When we were done, he looked at me. Let's not waste time. I can have this ready for you to sign tomorrow morning. Stop by around 8, and I'll file it with the court. I tried to hide my surprise, but he noticed and laughed. It's just a few simple documents to get started. The serious cases begin when we serve them with subpoenas and get them into court. Randy and Christine? They should both be named as defendants because they're married, the boy was born during the marriage, and Randy's name is likely on the birth certificate. I didn't fully understand, but it made sense. Still, suing the local cop over the paternity of a child he considers his own isn't fun. He won't do anything to me or you, the lawyer reassured. If he does, let me know and I'll handle it. Fair enough. The next morning at 8, I stopped by McNeely's law office. It took only 3 minutes to review the complaint and sign it. 2 days later, Christine and Randy received the lawsuit. It was 10:30, and I was in my room revising a sketch to make it darker and more intense. After 11 days of working with Marissa, things were coming together faster. The new crisis in my life, caused by Christine, was fueling my creativity. "You bastard!" I heard Christine shout from outside, followed by a knock on the door and more obscenities. I saved my outline, backed it up, and went downstairs. Dad beat me to the door. "Will you calm down?" he was telling her. "There's nothing you can do about it." "He's trying to ruin me," she screamed. "My marriage just because I left him for Randy. He never got over it, and now he's trying to ruin me." "Bullshit," Dad rumbled, and she froze. No one, especially her father, had ever spoken to her like that. "He's trying to find out if you stole his son from him," Dad continued. "My grandson. That's what he's trying to find out, and you know it. He has no right to." "Like hell he doesn't," Dad shouted, angrier than I'd ever seen him. "If that's his boy, if that's my grandson, he has every right to know and be a father to him." Christine's face showed shock. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. "And you, Christine," Dad said, pointing a finger at her. You had no right to keep this from him. You know that. So don't come in here and say Tyler did something wrong, because we both know that's bullshit. You're just mad that your perfect little world built on lies and selfishness is about to explode. Her eyes found me at the top of the stairs, begging for help. I raised an eyebrow. Is he wrong? I asked, walking down the stairs. Are you sure this boy belongs to Randy? When she didn't answer, I pressed on. You know Ben could be my son. You told Allie. Her face showed horror as she realized Allie had told me. Don't worry, I said, sarcasm dripping from my words. Your family didn't snitch until I got Allie to confess. But Tyler, she stammered, shifting her gaze between Dad and me, unsure how to handle both of us. And you've suspected it for over 6 months, I continued. 6 months, and you haven't said a word. She protested. He said that babies don't turn dark. Their pigment doesn't show up until they're a year old or more. And he's a year old now, I objected. He hasn't darkened one bit, has he? Her face told me the answer. It also told me she had realized the same thing a long time ago. I wondered how many nights she had spent praying that Ben would darken just a bit and his hair would turn from blonde to brown. Were you ever going to tell me? I asked. No, she whispered, looking down. I just hoped and prayed he'd never find out. Her father cut in, disgust evident in his voice. And now you're angry that he found out? Christine couldn't meet our eyes. Yes, she replied quietly. Her father waved his hand in disgust and walked away. Haven't you done enough to him already? Now you're trying to steal his son? I watched my father walk into another room, then turned back to Christine, who was fidgeting. Have a seat, I said, gesturing toward the couch. She sank down on the couch, resting her head in her hands. Can you tell me what I did that was so bad? I asked, sitting across from her. I loved you more than anything, and you dumped me without a word, without an explanation. You moved here, and you can't even tell me what I did wrong. What did I do to deserve this? Nothing, she muttered. It wasn't you, I continued, gaining strength. I find out from my parents that you're getting married and pregnant while we were still married. Did I deserve that? Was I that bad? She started to speak, but I didn't let her finish. My editor points out that your son might be mine, and then Allie confirms that you've thought the same thing for months. But you were afraid I'd find out. Christine looked at me, misery contorting her face. What did I ever do to you? I never cheated on you. I worked hard to give you everything you wanted. You weren't there for me, she sobbed, tears trickling down her cheeks. I was alone. I didn't know anyone, and you were gone all the time. I was lonely, and then when you were home, you wouldn't listen. You wouldn't slow down. That's bullshit, I rumbled, making her recoil. I didn't kiss your ass every time you demanded it. You knew how much work I'd have to do before we moved. You knew how much I'd have to keep earning for your perfect house, your shopping, those designer handbags, and golf clubs for your dad. You could have gotten a job or made friends, but you wanted everything without working for it. You wanted me to be there all the time and still provide for you. She was openly crying now, and for some reason I felt better. I'd been agonizing over her for so long. Now I wanted her to feel some of that pain. So how are you doing, Christine? Is Randy always around, or are the midnight shifts wearing you down? How's that crappy 2-bedroom apartment handling your growing family? Her look told me I hit a nerve. She knew she had screwed up, and now she knew I knew it too. What's worse, Christine? I asked, leaning in. Never seeing your husband but having all the stuff you can afford, or never seeing your husband and living in a crappy apartment, buying clothes at the Salvation Army. At least I have a family now, she shouted back. And my son. Not for long, I warned. Not if I have anything to do with it. You won't take Ben away from me, she gasped, horror on her face. He doesn't even know you. And whose fault is that? I replied. How do you think a judge will see it? You're hiding my son from me. Don't even think about it, she hissed. You're never taking my son. What about Randy? I continued. How will he react when he finds out Ben isn't his, especially since you can't have any more kids? Screw you, she hissed. Been there, done that, I said, getting up and walking to the door. And now that I've done it to others, you should know it wasn't so great. Her jaw dropped, stunned that someone could talk to Daddy's little princess like that. I opened the door and held it for her. I'll see you in court, Christine, I said. She slung her purse over her shoulder and stormed past me without another word. She got into her car, slammed the door, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. I was suddenly glad I'd been so direct but sad that she would do everything she could to keep me from my son. The confusion inside me showed in the sketch I finished 2 days later. Chapter 12. Writing is a funny thing. The more you do it, the easier it gets. You write faster and better with fewer mistakes. This was especially true for my second book in the series. I knew the main characters so well that writing their dialogue was second nature. The action took place only 40 miles from my home in Rockford, Illinois, a town I'd visited many times. It was easy to picture the landscape, the weather, and the old industrial buildings. I was spending 12 hours a day writing. I got up at 6, worked in the workshop from 7 to 11, and then wrote until I passed out around midnight. The pages filled quickly, and I was almost halfway through the draft by the time my first court hearing came around, about a month after Christine confronted me and Dad. Sitting in the crowded courtroom, I wondered if anything was getting done. The benches were packed with angry, somber people going through divorces. Lawyers shuffled papers, scribbled orders for the judge's signature, and whispered final settlement attempts. Every few minutes, another pair of lawyers would approach the judge, a woman in her mid-60s with boredom written all over her face. After 20 minutes, I saw James McNally at the end of the line, whispering with 2 other lawyers. When the case before them was over, he found me and motioned me forward. Collins v. Collins, now known as Walters, Judge Cliff said as we approached. "Good morning, Your Honor," McNally said. "James McNally representing the plaintiff, Mr. Collins, who is present here." "Sandra Petrosky for Mrs. Walters," said a low, scruffy woman. Mrs. Walters approached, squeezing through the crowd, and Randy followed her from the corner of the jury box. "And Robert Hall for Mr. Walters," said a short, middle-aged lawyer. "What are we here for, ladies and gentlemen?" asked Judge Cliff. The lawyers looked at each other, and the other 2 nodded to McNally. "My client was married to Mrs. Walters," he said, switching to a conversational tone. "Their marriage was dissolved in Florida about 18 months ago. We wish to enter that judgment into evidence and reopen the case." Judge Cliff waved her hand, urging him to get to the point. "Now, Judge," he continued, "Mrs. Walters gave birth to a son about a year ago? And you're just now getting around to assigning child support?" she asked. "Actually," McNally said, "we're not sure the child belongs to my client. We want an order for DNA testing to determine parentage." Judge Cliff reacted with no visible emotion. "Miss Petrosky," she said, looking at Christine's attorney. "We're challenging their right to request such a paternity test," Petrosky said. "Obviously," the judge said. She turned to the remaining attorney, Mr. Hall. He glanced at Randy, who nodded. "My client agrees to be tested." "Yes, he does, doesn't he?" she said, catching Christine's look at Randy and directing it back at me and then at Randy. Judge Cliff pursed her lips and looked at the 3 of us in turn. "Is there any reason why I shouldn't grant the request?" she asked Petrosky. "Well," Petrosky began. "Let me cut to the chase," the judge interrupted. "Is there a scientific probability that Mr. Collins is the father of this child?" Petrosky paused, then looked at Christine, seeking guidance. "You want me to ask your client in open court?" Judge Cliff asked, leaning over the bench and speaking more softly. Christine lowered her head. "No, Your Honor," Petrosky said, seeing Christine's shoulders tense. "We agreed to the recording of the court order and for the mother and child to undergo a DNA test." "Good," Judge Gluck said, leaning back in his chair. "Prepare me an order." We all nodded and stepped back. "What just happened in there?" I asked McNally as we stood outside the courtroom. Randy freaked out. "That's what happened," McNally replied. "You mean?" He nodded. "She told him she hadn't been with you in months. There's no way it could be your kid. And now that she's been forced to confess," I began. "Trouble in Pleasantville," he concluded. I laughed. "What's funny?" said Randy from behind me. I turned around. He stood there with his fists clenched, anger boiling in his eyes. "What's wrong, Randy?" "Surprised?" I asked. "Surprised she lied? Surprised that your wife, who slept with me, lied to you?" Hall said, stepping between us. "Calm down," McNally added, squeezing my shoulder. "And what are you going to do if Ben is my son?" I continued, leaning over Hall's shoulder and looking into Randy's face. Are you going to leave her? The love of your life? His jaw moved back and forth and his eyes spewed pure venom, but he said nothing. Yeah, that's what I thought, I said. Welcome to the club. I turned to McNally again, nodded, and walked away. What was so special about Christine? What did she have that made men put up with her crap and apologize when she was wrong? She had looks that could make most men melt, and she knew how to use them. But she also had a way of making you feel like you were the only one that mattered. I had seen that look 1,000,000 times. Sometimes to bend my will, sometimes to avoid my anger, and sometimes just to make me happy. She was smart, talkative, and fun. But she was also a spoiled brat who grew into a willful adult who wasn't used to being rejected. If Christine wanted something, she got it, or there would be a price to pay. Yet in all the years we were together, I never suspected she'd just drop me like a hot potato to get her way. Randy should have known better. He was only 3 years older than us and knew us both well. He knew she was married when she started making eyes at him, and he knew she didn't hesitate to cheat. I felt sorry for him. He played a part in ruining my marriage, but it was Christine who dealt the cards. Christine owed me loyalty, not Randy. And honestly, if the roles were reversed, I don't know how I would have handled it. It's easy to talk about doing the right thing, but it's different when you're single and someone as beautiful as Christine offers herself to you. Still, I was glad Randy was now going through what I had gone through. Let him deal with her for 12 years and see how he likes it. I was with her for a long time, and she left me without a second thought. I was better looking and made more money than Randy, so accept it, Randy. Chapter 13. Dad and I were both in rehab. I went 3 times a week for an hour, and Mom's progress was slow but steady. Dad was there every day for 5 or 6 hours, helping with her therapy, but he was still impatient. She's ready to go home, the doctor said again. But she can barely speak, Dad protested. It will take time, patience, and lots of practice, said the doctor. Is she walking? Will she improve? I asked. He nodded. Look, we're not just sending her home and that's it. She'll have physical therapy 5 days a week at home and speech therapy 3 days a week. Then why can't she stay here? I asked. The insurance company won't allow it, he said. It's cheaper to have it happen at home. But she won't get as much therapy at home, Dad objected. We'll make sure she gets the care she needs, the doctor assured. Actually, yes, the doctor said, pressing his lips together like he was bored with this conversation. She'll get the same amount of time with a therapist each week as she does now. You've seen it, Mr. Collins. You're the one helping her with exercises and stuff. But we don't have the things we need for that at home, Dad continued. The insurance company will pay for the rent and installation of all this equipment, the doctor explained. You'll have everything you need. What if I just pay for her to stay here? I asked. The doctor looked at me like I was crazy. I have more than enough money to pay for her to stay here, I said, but he only shook his head. You're wasting your money. Honestly, she should have been discharged home a week ago. She'll feel more familiar and comfortable in her home. Once you get her there, the pace of her recovery will pick up quite rapidly, faster than here. As long as you both do everything the physical therapist and speech therapist tell you to do, and I mean everything. If anything, do too much. I looked at Dad, who didn't seem convinced, then back at the doctor. What if her recovery goes south? One of them will tell us and we'll assess the best course of action, he said. He paused, looking at both of us, then sighed, his face softening. He'd been through this with hundreds of families before us. Listen, trust me. You'll see for yourself. I know it's hard to believe, but she's really progressing fast. We expect her to regain speech and almost full use of her right side. There will be some lasting effects, mostly in facial muscles and grip strength, but she's doing much better than any of us realized. Okay, Dad said. We'll give it a try. So when does she get discharged? I asked. Saturday, he said. But that's only in 2 days, Dad finished for me. We've already got the equipment you'll need ready to be delivered tomorrow. Can anyone be there between 9 and noon? I can, I said. He nodded. Good, then let's get on it. The next morning at 9:30, the doorbell rang. Good morning, Tyler, said a smiling, pot-bellied Denny Costy. Denny? I said, shaking his hand. What are you doing here? Labor, he said, looking around the living room over my shoulder. And you're not ready for it? I can see that now. How much is there? I asked. A lot. He brushed past me into the house. We've got a lot to clean up, he said, then turned, his face lighting up with a cherubic smile. By the way, how are you doing? I'm fine, Denny, I smiled back. It's good to see you. It's good to see you too. You've been back for a while now, I know. Seen you around a couple of times. Been busy, I explained. Yeah, he said, his face turning serious. Tough case with your mom. Great woman. Thanks. He nodded, then picked up one end of the coffee table and nodded for me to take the other end. Let's move this stuff to the side for now, he said. Once we set everything up, we'll see what stays and what goes to the basement. Okay. Do you always do that? No, he said, lifting his end of the solid walnut table like it was a feather. But you've been my protector. A special bond, you know, between a center and his quarterback. I mean, how many times a game did you cover me? How many games a season? He winked, setting the table down. You learned to get attached to your quarterback. I laughed. Well, it's been nice. Yeah, he said, lifting his end of the couch. But you could have bought me dinner or something. Instead, just touch and go. The rest of the moving session went the same way, us laughing and talking about school and what we'd been up to since. I was amazed and even a little ashamed to learn that chubby little Denny Cost was no ordinary mover. He was the owner of the company. He insisted on this delivery when he saw the address, and he didn't bring an assistant, hoping I'd help and we could chat about the good old days. Why don't you ever show up? He asked as we settled into chairs for a breather after moving all the equipment into the house. I shrugged. Been busy, I guess. You know, living in Florida, trying to make a life there and stuff. And you? He asked. Did you succeed in all that? Sure, and all it cost me was my marriage. So you got what you wanted, but it bit you in the ass? Strongly agreed, I said. Sucks. Yeah. We spent the next half hour setting up the hospital bed and all the gadgets for physical therapy, then another hour rearranging the living room furniture and moving some to the basement. Well, Denny said, wiping his hands on his jeans, it'll do for now. I looked around the room and nodded. Yeah, that should be enough. You know, he said, turning around and giving me a level look. Friday night we're getting together with some people from high school and a few friends who live here now, Denny said. I nodded. It's going to be at our house tonight, around 6:30 or 7. I know everyone will be happy to see you. Has Christine ever been there? I asked. A few times. He nodded, his smile turning grim. Not often, but sometimes. I wondered about that. We lived in the same town, knew the same people. I couldn't let her drive me away. So what should I bring? I asked. An appetizer and whatever you're going to drink? He grinned. Deal, I said, shaking his hand. He shook it back with an iron grip, then looked at his own hand when the shake broke. No way, he said, placing the bill on the hospital bed. I covered your ass in high school. I still do now. Then invite your wife and kids over for dinner, I suggested. I owe you a lot of dinners, don't I? He laughed. No way! You're not getting rid of all those quick feelings for a lousy $1,000. I want to be wined and dined. We laughed together, and he left. I stopped writing at 6 and started getting ready for the party at Denny's house. 45 minutes later, dressed in jeans and a long-sleeved white shirt with the cuffs rolled up to mid-forearm, I pulled up to Denny's house in a new neighborhood on the outskirts of Grant City. About 10 cars were already parked in the driveway and along the curbs. I could hear laughter and conversation as I grabbed a case of light beer and a tray of hummus and pita chips from the back seat. As I turned the corner of the house and headed toward the large terrace where everyone was gathered, I was greeted by a chorus of "Tyler" and "Hey, dude." "Hey, Tyler," Denny's petite wife said, giving me a peck on the cheek and taking the hummus tray from my hands. "There's some beer in the fridge over there. Thanks for having us over." "Thanks for coming," she replied, genuinely happy to see me. She had graduated a few years after us, and I remembered her as a tiny girl with short, boyish features. She was still small, much smaller than Denny, but her facial features were now cute, like a pixie. She had definitely grown into a fine lady. "Stay away from her," Denny shouted from the group of guys, interrupting my observations. I waved him off with a chuckle and started putting beers into the cooler with ice, leaving one out. I opened it, took a sip, and walked over to Denny and his group. It felt like a high school party, but at the same time, it wasn't. Among the 35 or so people were guys and girls we'd gone to school with, but there were younger and older faces as well. Some I recognized from growing up in Grant City, and some were from other parts of the country but now called Grant City home. We chatted for a while, catching up on who was married, divorced, had kids, owned businesses, worked for others, and so on. I had been there for about an hour when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Hey, Tyler." I tensed up, realizing it was a distinct possibility. Forcing myself to smile, I turned around. "Hey, Christine." The group I was talking to fell silent, casting glances and whispering. "Have you gotten to the clinic yet? Given them your DNA?" I shook my head. "Next Friday." "It's yours," she said, her eyes sad. I narrowed my eyes, unsure of her game. "Can we talk for a few minutes?" she asked, somewhere less public. After a moment, I nodded and we walked into the house. We settled on the couch in the living room, closing the door behind us. "I didn't know," she began, dropping her eyes to the floor. "But you knew it was possible," I said. She nodded. "And when you suspected, you didn't tell me?" She looked up at me, her gaze blank. "Have you ever had dreams?" she asked, almost to herself. "Because I used to have them all the time, and sometimes, if I was lucky, dreams came true. But then you find out that those dreams aren't really dreams at all." She turned to face me, her eyes focused on mine. "So what did you dream, Christine? Because I can tell you what mine was like." "The same as yours," she said. "To be with you always, to have a family, never worrying about money and bills, to live in a big house and have a big family." "Ward and June Cleaver," I said. She nodded. "Ward and June Cleaver. And just when we almost had everything," I said, "you left me for him." She looked at the floor again and muttered something. "What?" I asked, leaning closer. "I said I didn't leave you for him, for Randy's sake. I left you for my dream." She lifted her head, her eyes begging me to understand. "I didn't think I'd get my dream with you. I didn't think we'd ever have a family and, well, everything. I thought you'd just keep working 100 hours a week and I'd be stuck in this house all alone," she said. "And when did you start coming back here?" I asked. "Scylla told me I didn't belong in Florida. She said you were being selfish, keeping me in the house all day and stopping me from starting a family," she continued. "And my family, Mom and Dad, they missed me and wanted grandchildren. We needed to come back. You never once suggested we sell the house and move back here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I know, but would you have offered? Would you have done it?" "I guess we'll never know now," I said. We were silent for a few moments. Then a thought occurred to me. "You know," I said half to myself, "as soon as I found out Mom had a stroke and Dad needed help, I immediately sold everything and came here. So I guess we know, don't we? If you'd come to me, I'd probably have moved back here." She nodded. "That's what I thought." "Then why?" I asked. She thought for a moment before answering. "I guess I just figured you didn't really love me anymore." "Based on what?" "I don't know. You were working so hard, you weren't listening to me as much, spending more time away," she said. "And when you got here, Randy listened to every word and movement you made." She sighed, which was answer enough. "And now?" I asked. "He's already filed for divorce. I got the papers yesterday." "Why? Isn't it a bit rushed?" "He says he feels humiliated. I lied to him, let him think Ben was his, and now he has to tell everyone that Ben isn't his, that he's yours." We sat in silence for a few minutes. I could see she wanted to say something, but she looked thoughtful. "Go ahead," I said softly. "Ask anything you want." She shook her head, and I put my hand over hers and squeezed. "Why, Allie?" she asked. "Is it to get back at me?" I chuckled inwardly. "No, not everything is about you, Christine," I said. "Well, I think it's partly about you. Why do you ask?" "Because she was available, and I was comfortable with her, and I was drawn to her. Partly, I suppose, because she reminded me so much of you. But no, I didn't spend time with her to get back at you or to hurt you. A year ago? Maybe, but not now." "And you're going to give her another chance?" she asked, her face showing she hoped not. "No. I'm pretty sure that ship has sailed." "Is it because of me? Because she kept my secret?" "Yes and no. No, It's not because of you. Yes, because she should have told me if she loved me the way she said she did. She couldn't keep something like that from me. It's not her fault, Christine protested. No, it is her fault. She made her bed. What about us? Can we be friends again, Tyler? I thought about it. I don't know. Will you ever be able to forgive me? I asked, confused by the direction of the conversation. What are you looking for here, Christine? She looked into my eyes, trying to smile and failing miserably. Are you thinking about getting back together? Her nod was so slight I almost missed it. My eyes widened and I felt my jaw drop at what she was suggesting. We're here again, she said, back home. And now we have a baby boy together. If you can forgive me, I'll listen better, appreciate you the way I always should have. I felt her hand squeeze mine in response. Her touch was soft and familiar. Say something, she whispered. At least say you'll think about it. I could only nod. Okay, time to explain what was going on in my mind. 2 years ago, the love of my life ran away without any explanation. She married another guy, the guy she was seeing while she was married to me and had a baby. Now I find out that the baby is most likely mine and that hubby number 2 has dumped her. She's single again. And she doesn't hate me. She hates herself for leaving and might want to get back together. So what do? Do you tell her to back off? Easy to say if she hasn't been the love of your life. It's even harder when you add our probable child together and having to interact one way or another for the next 17 years. Wanting to give little Ben a solid family life and proper upbringing. Tyler, she said in my ear. Okay, I mumbled, wanting to get away from her for at least a little while. Sure, I'll think about it. Okay, thanks, she said. Relief showed on her face. I noticed there was no triumph. The old Christine would have been pleased that she'd gotten her way again. But that look was gone. Was she genuinely remorseful? Let's go back and meet some people I haven't seen in a while, okay? I said. She nodded, then lifted me to my feet and led me back to the deck. When we got there, I saw Allie talking to a group of people on the lawn. Our gazes met. Then she shifted her eyes to Christine, who was holding my hand. Her lips pressed together and her eyes found mine again. Then, in a flash, she turned to respond to something someone in the group had said, and a smile appeared on her face. I spent the rest of the evening socializing with old friends and meeting new ones. Christine wasn't exactly hovering over me, but was usually close by. At one point, I saw her and Allie whispering, glancing at each other, just what I needed in my life. Drama. Chapter 14. The next day, Dad and I got Mom settled in. We spent a few hours arranging things the way she wanted and caring for her, like the pair of clueless knuckleheads we were. I had seen Mom many times since her stroke, but now that she was back home, it looked so sad. She was a small, frail lump of skin and bones, dressed in a baggy tracksuit and sitting in a chair. She was 58 years old, but looked 20 years older. Her hair was a mess and seemed even more gray. Her skin was pale and gaunt, and she could only communicate by slurred speech. Some words were slurred and barely understandable, and by pointing with her left hand, her right hand still lay at her side, practically useless. "Let's go," I said. When things were back to normal, I took her right arm in my hands and began doing the stretching, strength, and motor skills exercises we were instructed to do. That's how the first day back went. Hard work on exercises and speech with the noise of a televised baseball game in the background. There was one bright moment, though, when Dad put her dinner on a tray in front of the TV. "What's this?" she asked, and the words sounded oddly familiar. "Dinner," he proclaimed, proud of his progress in the kitchen while she was gone. "Pot roast with potatoes and carrots." "Really?" she said, unimpressed. The expression on her half-paralyzed face said she didn't believe him. I'd been eating Dad's roast at least once a week for the past few months, so I had to agree with her assessment, so Mom was obviously still sharp as a tack. The doorbell rang at 11 on Sunday. "Christine," I said, looking up to see her standing on the doorstep, holding Ben in one hand and a basket in the other. "Take him," she said, as she leaned the baby into my arms and walked past me into the house. "What are you doing?" Dad started when he saw her. "I'm sorry about the last time I was here," Christine cut him short. "I'm really sorry, and you were right about everything, and I know it." He nodded, shifting his gaze from her to little Ben, squirming in my arms. I swayed my hips gently and held on to him as best I could. "Anyway," Christine continued, walking past Dad into the dining room and into the kitchen, calling out over her shoulder as she went, "This morning at church they said Sally was coming home today, so I figured it wasn't a good idea to subject her to a bad cookout on her first day." Mom snorted. Too late. Dad frowned, shifting his gaze from the kitchen to Mom and then to me. Then he focused on the little boy wriggling in my arms, and his features softened. "Put him down," Dad said, crouching and holding out his arms. I lowered Ben to the ground, and he walked over to Dad. "Really?" Mom said, her eyes lighting up with hope. "Your grandson?" she asked. Christine confirmed, leaning against the doorway and watching. Her smile was weary, and her body tensed in anticipation of the inevitable barrage of questions. But they didn't follow. Instead, Dad picked Ben up in his arms and carried him over to Mom, placing him in her lap. I swear I never thought I'd see her so happy again. It was like an extra 20 years disappeared. When I turned around, Christine had already disappeared into the kitchen. She froze when she heard my footsteps behind her. "Thank you," I said. She let the words sink in, and her whole body relaxed as she continued to arrange the dinner plates. "I'm not hungry," I said as she picked up another plate. She turned to look at me. "Really?" I said, smiling, "just not hungry." "Oh." She looked disappointed, as if her first attempt to win me back hadn't gone as planned. "But I'll help you feed Ben," I said. "After all, now that I have a son and all, I might as well learn to take care of him, right?" She smiled, pleased with my response. A few minutes later, Dad helped Mom to the dining room table, and we all sat down to eat lunch. Christine sat next to Mom, chatting about Ben and all the joys of parenting. She occasionally wiped Mom's mouth with a napkin. She looked like the Christine I had fallen in love with, sweet and caring. Dad was eating fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and gravy, sharing every other forkful with a messy Ben who sat on my lap, staining his shirt and my pants with half the food offered to him. "Nice," Mom said, looking at Ben and me, her eyes shining. Christine turned and looked at us, seeing me try to wipe off the potatoes and gravy with my sleeve, and she snorted. "Welcome to fatherhood," she said. When no one reacted, the laughter left her eyes and she looked sad. I only smiled back. "Guess I'll have to make up for lost time," I said. She tried to smile back. "Better late than never," Dad said, picking up his plate and carrying it to the sink. "You doing okay, Ma?" Mom only nodded, her eyes fixed on Ben as she chewed her food slowly. "Christine?" Dad asked. "I'm fine," Christine said. "Let me get that for you." She got up, rinsed her plate, and put it in the dishwasher. Then she busied herself with the leftovers. She had brought enough for at least 3 meals and took her time putting it all away in the fridge and cleaning up the counter. I used that time to wipe Ben's mouth, then moved to the chair next to Mom and whispered in his ear. "Grandma's chicken and table." Damn, I didn't know what to say. I just knew Mom brightened up when he was around. When Christine finished, she turned around and froze. This was much harder for her than I thought it would be. It was written all over her face. Everyone could see it. Regret, sadness, a mask begging for forgiveness. She tried to speak but ended up clearing her throat. "I'm going to get some fresh air," she said, rushing to the back door. I looked at Mom and Dad. "Come on," Dad said, holding out his hands. "My turn." I passed Ben across the table into Dad's hands. After standing for a moment, I went outside and walked around the house. Christine was nowhere to be seen, but I could smell cigarette smoke from the direction of the woodshop. "There you are," I said, turning the corner. She was sitting there, clutching her cigarette and trying not to cry. "When did you start doing that again?" I asked. She looked at the cigarette in her hand. "Sorry," she said, trying to let the smoke out. "No. Keep going if it makes you feel better." She nodded, took a deep puff, and spoke, exhaling the smoke with her words. "I just didn't think it would be this hard, you know. If you hadn't come back, I'd never see you again, right? It would have been so much easier." "Still not telling me about Ben?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, not that kind of thing. Truth be told, I started to realize what a complete mess I'd made when his hair didn't get any darker and his eyes stayed blue 6 or 7 months ago." She looked at me, trying to catch my reaction. I didn't say anything back, preferring to listen. She turned away to look at the woods. "I shouldn't have done any of that, Tyler," she said, her voice sluggish. "None of it. I shouldn't have listened to Mom or Scylla. I shouldn't have come back here dreaming about what I could have had. I should have focused on what we already had." She snorted. "Something funny?" I asked. She looked back at me for a second, then at the forest. "I traded loneliness for pure misery." She laughed again, but it was a bitter laugh. "You worshipped the ground I walked on. Randy just wanted to entertain me. I mistook lust for love. Then when he found out I was pregnant, he proposed. I'm still not sure he really loved me, but he definitely liked the thought of me coming home every night and having a son. And I don't know what," she added. "What don't you know?" I asked. "He wasn't you, okay?" she said, and the tears she'd been holding back finally came out. "He just wasn't you, and all I wanted was you. I would have dumped him in a second if I thought there was a chance you'd take me back. I'd have crawled through 1,000 miles of mud if I'd known you'd take me into your arms when I arrived. But it was too late. I'd already ruined everything. So I've decided to settle for the dream world I've created here." "So why now?" I asked. "Is it just because Randy left?" "He didn't leave," she said. "I moved out. Me and Ben. The day after you handed me the papers. That surprised me." "So when you were in court, you'd been living apart for a month. Then why did you— What the hell is this? You challenged the DNA test. You're going to try to take him away from me?" she whispered. I felt the anger rising in me. "Is that what this is about now?" "No," she sobbed. "This is what the trial was about." "But not now, Tyler. That's not why I'm here. That's not why I'm trying so hard to show you I've changed." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, with some of her hair sticking to the blush on her cheeks. "You can see that, can't you? You know I'm telling the truth, don't you?" "I see a scared little girl," I said. "A scared little girl who squandered her whole life. And now she's afraid of losing the last thing she has." She shook her head. "No, Tyler, that's not true. I want us to be friends. Even if you never take me back, I still don't want you to hate me. You have every right to—" I said nothing, keeping my mouth shut. "I know all about your book," she pleaded. "I know you have enough money to bury me in court, to possibly take Ben away from me. Allie told me you're going to be famous. But I don't want any of that. I don't want any of that." She turned away and tried to hold back the tears, wiping her face with her hands and hiccuping from the effort. "Tyler, if you let me keep Ben, I will never deny you contact with him. I don't need your money. I will support him on my own. But I want him to know his father. I know I was wrong. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I'm asking you to give me a chance." "And you're sure he's mine?" Christine sat down on the floor, leaning her back against the workshop wall and tucking her legs under her. "When you came back to town, I was afraid something like this would happen, so I went online and ordered a DNA test kit. I took some of Randy's DNA while he was sleeping, swabbed Ben, and mailed it in. There's no way Randy is the father." She looked up at me, seeing the skepticism on my face. "You'll understand if I don't trust you on this one," I said. She just stared at me. "Who else have you slept with?" I asked. "No one," she replied. "Just you and Randy. All my life it's just been the two of you." She smiled sadly. "I guess that's why I wasn't as hot in bed as you said. Maybe I should have read more or rented some pay-per-view movies on the dirty channels." I sat down next to her. "Well," I said, looking out into the woods, "maybe I was exaggerating when I said that." She nudged me with her elbow. "What? Exaggerated?" "Okay, maybe a little." "A little," she said, turning to look at me. "Maybe even more than a little." "Maybe a little more than a little," I admitted. "Shithead," she said, pushing me to the side. "Hey," I protested, but she just laughed and stood up. "Let's go," she said, walking back toward the house. "Time to put Ben to bed." By the time we got back to the house, Ben was sound asleep, curled up on Mom's lap. She was gently stroking his hair, and Dad was watching from across the room. After leaving them alone, I went upstairs with Christine and showed her the new book I was working on. She was impressed with the outline and even more impressed with the story I had already written. However, she cringed when she realized that the ex-wife character was based on her. "You think this is bad?" I said, reaching into the box next to my desk and pulling out the manuscript of the first book. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.